Thank you for bringing your expertise to Colorado and the Colorado bands. This video will introduce you to the Colorado Bandmasters Association Scoring Priorities. We will be covering the normal judging processes of impression, analysis, and comparison, emphasizing the Colorado principles. Specifically, we want you to focus on ranking and rating. Under the impression portion of your judging, please balance your commentary evenly between the what subcaption and the how subcaption, reflecting the performances and the achievements of the day. As you sample across the points of comparison, Colorado does ask that you identify areas within the points of comparison that provide opportunities for the bands to increase the ways they may get points, whether it be a content or an achievement area. Please do include those opportunities in the wrap-up. When we get to analysis, today we're going to explore the box thirds and the Colorado view of emerging, realizing, and fulfilling. Then we will talk about comparison and how you will work across the day comparing bands. Please do take notes so that you can remember. And specifically, we will be going over the meaning of a tenth for Colorado. Let's dig into a little bit of the impression. As you look at the box criteria, it will be very similar to other formats you've seen across the country. We ask that you look at the box thirds and understand their meaning. Specifically, Colorado uses the words emerging for the first third of the box, where the bands meet some of the criteria some of the time. Realizing, which is the middle of the box, where the bands meet most of the criteria most of the time. And fulfilling, which is the top third of the box, where the bands meet all of the criteria for that box all of the time. Here's a different view with many more words that you can read along the way. As we've spoken earlier, the emerging into the box means that the band has met all the criteria of the box below and some of the criteria some of the time of the new box. A band only needs to show one or two elements of the new box in order to move into that box. The middle of the box is most of the criteria most of the time, and the shift for Colorado is the fulfilling area of meeting all the criteria all the time, and potentially some of the box elements of the next higher box at the top third. So it shifts the scoring possibilities a little bit higher for Colorado. Please make sure to look at those elements as you look at this box example. A 63 in box 3 and 83 in box 4 is the threshold for all the criteria all the time. We do want you to also consider that comparable scores in a neighborhood are basically within a box third. So those criteria are very similar, even though bands can bounce around between your impression. You can see a floating scale of neighborhoods and comparable scores, especially across a box boundary. So we really ask you to look at 6 to 7 tenths as being a neighborhood, and that a 67 is the same score as a 73, basically, as you compare it on the system. There are no solid boundaries anywhere on the criteria scale for Colorado. The meaning of a number is only when you compare it to other bands. Let's dig into a little bit of an example for analysis after you've gotten your impression, and then how do you start to dig into what you've seen. Here's an example of a few bands and what you may have seen from an impression across the time of the show. You can see Team 1 and its elements of different experiences, different impressions. Any band can go anywhere on the scale at any time. So these are just meant to be references to how you might have seen and experienced bands across their performance. So there's 3 examples here, and then we will dig into them a little bit more with some scoring priorities later. Right now, what I want you to think about is how would you come up with an overall impression? And one example could be that you just average the numbers that you've seen across the impression. And here's an example of just these raw numbers averaged. And you can see, even though the third band had started really high and then seemed to have lost quality over time, could have been an incomplete program, still averaged higher score. If we were to apply medians, it totally changes what we're approaching. What we ask you to do, though, is you actually need to analyze and compare those impressions against the points of comparison on the score sheet, and it would drive you to a different example and a different number. Also, what you see here is the leaning and the ask of you for Colorado is, since these bands have had elements of box 4 throughout the impression portion of the judging, then they need to lean into that box. We do want to emphasize for Colorado that derived achievement is significant, and when you're comparing two similar groups, that you really look for who has the more, who demonstrated and achieved more from a content standpoint, simultaneous responsibility, physical or environmental challenges. Also in the comparison, as we talked about team number 3, incomplete programs, which means they're really lacking something. Not that they're a complete idea in a shorter amount of time. A shorter, complete idea could still win, but incomplete programs need to be acknowledged and commented on from the adjudicators. Incomplete programs will not receive full credit in any caption. Incomplete color guard programs will not receive full credit in any visual caption, and it should reflect itself in music effect and the visual effect captions. While this is subjective, we ask you to not take away, but look for how much credit you can give for the performance. So you're really looking for a totality, and use your caption. So if you're doing an analysis caption that may be quantitative, then 2 minutes may be enough versus compared to 4 minutes of a different group. It's up to you to look at how you would reflect that across the course of the show. The key here is that we ask you to judge the criteria and filter what you see with what you don't see through the points of comparison. And this will be a key element through the actual comparison process, which we will be going into next. As we started to discuss on the impression portion, and then you start to do your analysis, there are 3 ways to compare. You can compare by similarities and by differences, which really is very much a personal view, and you're targeting your own preferences and biases. We ask you to look through the subcaptions, cover all of the points of comparison, and really filter and look for who had more of everything that the score sheet is looking for across time. Now we're going to move into a scoring example, which applies these comparing ideas with the meaning of a tenth for Colorado. It also shows you a process that you may go through throughout the day, because some of the contests are rather large in some of the preliminaries. The meaning of a tenth in Colorado, just as a reminder, is the difference of 1, 2, or 3 tenths in your overall total score. The meaning of a tenth applies to the total score and the spread between bands in their final number. 1, 2, or 3 tenths means that they're essentially equal, and you could switch your decision later. The next performance could be different. 4, 5, 6 tenths shows that there's at least one identifiable or more narrow differences, something that was either in the content or in the achievement of that day that truly set those bands apart. If you can identify 1 to 2 significant differences, then your total bottom line spread would be between 7, 8, or 9 tenths. And then 1 point or more really is showing there's significant difference. The bands are probably not in the same neighborhood. And if you remember, our criteria for Colorado is probably 6 to 7 tenths would be the neighborhood range, box third. And then you can extend that a little bit based on how many are in the neighborhood. And the minute you cross out of a box third, you may be into a different neighborhood. Let's go through an example of rating and profiling. Here is team 1. And basically, we're using the impressions that we had from the original diagram presented earlier. We are thinking about the impressions we had earlier and deciding where to put this score. You can see here that the content was a little bit uneven, and yet the performance was very strong. So this was reflected as putting the how slightly over the what and coming up with the total number. Second band comes on, and the content was a little bit higher, but the delivery of that was significantly lower. So this drove out the total impression and the score. The meaning of this spread is that there are narrow identifiable differences. So you'd be able to explain on your file and in your notes that you saw a couple of things that were different that set you apart in placing the bands into this neighborhood. Third team comes on, and this was the team that we perceived as potentially being less done or incomplete. So you might reflect that in the content score, in the what score, and yet they performed and delivered it well. And so your ranking is the priority, and then putting spreads between the subcaptions, and then driving out a total number. Essentially, teams 2 and 3 were equal in how you perceived them, yet you differentiated them in the what subcaption and in the how subcaption to come up with a different number. Here's a key moment that occurs in the contest. Then you need to compare that third team back to the first team, and in a real contest, you compare them to all the teams that you've seen, but specifically within a neighborhood. What do these numbers mean, given the third team compared to the first team? When you did that comparison, you realized that 3/10 was saying those team 1 and team 3 could be interchangeable, and that was not the case. And so then you adjust the score for team 1 and you give it the correct spread. One more band comes on, and again, you've looked at it, you've rated and ranked the subcaptions, you've put the spreads in compared to how this fourth band performed against everyone else, and you've gone back and you've said, hey, let's look at this. Team 3 and team 4, the narrow identifiable differences is true. Team 3 and team 2 are essentially equal, so you feel good about that. And then you have to ask yourself that question again of team 4 compared to team 1, given that what score is so close, what do you mean by that number? And right now it's 9/10 difference in the total score, and that means that there are significant differences, and you decide that it needs to be a little bit further away to differentiate the teams. And so you adjust that what score, and then you can go back and make sure all of those numbers are exactly what you want. And a point difference means team 4 and team 1 on this performance of today, while considered in the same neighborhood, they're not really comparable based on the performance achievement and the total score of today. And then you go back and make sure that each of these spreads is exactly what you want. So you've readjusted team 1 and team 2 to make sure they retain the identifiable differences you had at the beginning of the show. It's a key point for you to remember that the only meaning of a number is when you look back at the ranking and the spreading and the rating across the entire contest. That's how the bands get the information that they need, and that's the message you send through your numbers and your spreads. Reminder of what we've covered so far. Meaning of a 10th is the total score. We've looked at what the box thirds mean in terms of emerging, realizing, fulfilling. And you want to tell the teams how they can get points through the commentary and especially in your wrap-up. Colorado asks you to combine your ability to identify what you see with your ability to filter what you see and don't see through the subcaption points of comparison before arriving at your ranking. A lot of stuff goes into each of those 3 decisions: what subcaption, how subcaption, and total. Colorado thanks you for your expertise. Colorado thanks you for your focus on our priorities. Have a great show.